The city never sleeps, but that night, Adrian Cole wished it had. Because in the stillness between midnight and regret, he realized something far worse than betrayal. He realized he felt nothing at all. The apartment on the 32nd floor overlooked the Hudson like a painting too perfect to be real. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city in soft gold and steel, the hum of Manhattan reduced to a distant, elegant whisper. Everything about Adrian and Lillian Cole's home was deliberate. Minimalist furniture, curated art, books arranged not just by genre but by color. It was the kind of place people photographed when they visited. It was the kind of place people envied. And it was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that stretched too long between conversations. Adrian stood near the window, loosening his tie with one hand while scrolling through emails on his phone. Even at 9:47 p.m., his inbox buzzed with urgency. Contracts, deadlines, expectations. He thrived in it, the clarity of rules, the certainty of outcomes. "Did you eat?" Lillian's voice floated from the kitchen. He glanced back. She stood by the marble counter, a glass of wine in hand, her silhouette softened by the warm pendant light above. She looked exactly like she always did, effortlessly composed, impossibly distant. "I had something at the office," he replied without looking up. A pause. Not long, just enough. "I made pasta," she said, quieter this time. "It's still warm." Adrian nodded faintly. "Thanks." Another silence. This one lingered. Lillian took a sip of her wine, watching him, not openly, but in the subtle way people observe something they no longer understand. There had been a time when he would walk into the room and pull her into a kiss without thinking. When dinner meant conversation, laughter, unfinished stories. Now, it felt like they were both performing roles they had memorized years ago. "You're working late again tomorrow?" she asked. "Trial prep," Adrian said. "It'll be a long week." She nodded, as if she expected that answer. Because she did. Okay, that was it. No argument, no disappointment voiced aloud. Just acceptance. Later that night, they lay in the same bed, separated by more than just the space between pillows. Lillian scrolled through her phone, the soft glow reflecting in her eyes. Adrian lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing arguments he'd deliver in court. "Do you ever think about taking a break?" she asked suddenly. He turned his head slightly. "From work?" "From everything." The question lingered in the air, fragile and dangerous. Adrian frowned faintly. "That's not really how things work." Lillian let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. "Yeah," she murmured. "I guess not." He didn't ask what she meant, and she didn't explain. The next morning, their routine unfolded with mechanical precision. Coffee brewed at exactly 6:30. Adrian skimmed the news on his tablet, while Lillian stood by the window, tying her hair into a low knot. They moved around each other effortlessly, like dancers who had memorized every step, but forgotten why they started dancing in the first place. "You have that event tonight, right?" Adrian asked. Lillian hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Yeah, a gallery opening." "Late?" "Probably." He nodded. "Text me when you're heading home." "I will." She picked up her bag, pausing by the door. "Adrian?" He looked up. For a moment it seemed like she wanted to say something more, something real. Her fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her bag, her lips parting as if searching for the right words. But then, "Nothing," she said softly. "Have a good day." "You too." The door closed behind her with a quiet click. At the office, Adrian moved through his day with the same controlled efficiency that defined his life. Meetings blurred into strategy sessions, conversations reduced to outcomes. People respected him, trusted him, feared him sometimes. He liked it that way. It meant things made sense. Unlike the quiet tension he couldn't quite name at home. Around noon, his colleague Marcus leaned against his office door. "You still pretending everything's perfect?" Marcus asked casually. Adrian didn't look up from his files. "I don't pretend anything." Marcus smirked. "Right. That's why you've been sleeping here half the week." Adrian paused, just for a second, then continued reading. "It's just work," he said. "Sure it is." Marcus didn't push further. He never did. But the comment lingered longer than Adrian expected. That evening, the city glowed brighter than usual, reflections dancing across glass buildings, taxis weaving through streets like restless thoughts. Adrian left the office later than planned, again. By the time he reached home, the apartment was empty. Lillian hadn't returned yet. He loosened his tie, stepping inside the silence that greeted him like an old habit. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, soft, expensive, familiar. He walked into the kitchen. The pasta from the night before was gone. The wineglass cleaned and placed neatly in the cabinet. Everything in its place, everything untouched. Except her phone. It sat on the counter, screen dark, forgotten. Adrian frowned. Lillian never forgot her phone. Not anymore. He stared at it for a moment longer than necessary, then looked away, then back again. Something unspoken tightened in his chest. Not quite suspicion, not quite concern, just awareness. Slowly, almost absent-mindedly, he reached for it. The screen lit up, and in that brief moment, everything began to shift. The message wasn't explicit. That was the first thing Adrian noticed. No hearts, no declarations, no careless words that could be easily condemned. Just a name he didn't recognize, and a sentence that lingered in ambiguity. Last night felt different. I can't stop thinking about it. Adrian stared at the screen longer than he should have. The city outside blurred into a wash of moving lights, but inside the apartment everything felt unnaturally still. His reflection hovered faintly over the glass of the phone, composed, unreadable, almost detached from the moment itself. It could mean anything, he told himself. It could mean nothing. And yet, something in the phrasing, something in the quiet intimacy of it, didn't belong to coincidence. The front door clicked open. Adrian placed the phone back exactly where it had been, screen down, as if returning a piece to a puzzle he wasn't ready to solve. "Hey," Lillian called softly, stepping inside. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, slower than usual. There was a subtle hesitation in her movements, as though she were re-entering a space that no longer felt entirely like home. "You back late," Adrian said, his tone neutral. "Yeah, the event ran over." She slipped off her coat, hanging it with careful precision. Her eyes flickered toward the kitchen counter for just a fraction of a second, quick, almost imperceptible, but Adrian saw it. Always controlled, he thought, always aware. "How was it?" he asked. "Good. A bit. Crowded." She moved toward the sink, turning on the faucet even though there was nothing to wash. The sound of running water filled the silence between them, a quiet buffer against conversation. Adrian leaned against the counter, watching her, not accusing, not confrontational, just observing. "Did you forget your phone?" he asked casually. Her hand paused under the stream of water, just for a second, then resumed. "Yeah," she said, not turning around. "Didn't realize until I was already in the cab." Another pause. "You didn't need me?" she added, almost too quickly. Adrian's gaze lingered on her back. No, that was the truth, and somehow it felt heavier than a lie. The changes didn't happen all at once. They unfolded gradually, like cracks in glass, barely visible at first, until suddenly they were everywhere. Lillian started coming home later, not dramatically late, just enough to shift the rhythm of their evenings. Enough that dinners became optional, conversation shortened, routines disrupted in ways that couldn't be easily questioned. Her phone became an extension of her body, always within reach, always face down, and when it lit up, she noticed immediately, too immediately. One night, Adrian watched as she read the message and allowed herself the smallest smile, not the polite, practiced kind she gave colleagues or acquaintances, but something softer, something private, something real. "Something funny?" he asked. She looked up, startled for a split second before smoothing her expression. "Just work," she said. Adrian nodded. He didn't ask to see. Across the city, in a small, dimly lit cafe tucked between a bookstore and a florist, Lillian sat across from a man who listened. That was the difference. Ethan Blake didn't interrupt. He didn't check his phone mid-conversation. He didn't reduce her words to solutions or outcomes. He just listened. "You ever feel like you disappeared somewhere along the way?" Lillian asked, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Disappeared?" "Like you're still there," she clarified, "but no one's really looking at you anymore." He didn't answer immediately, didn't rush to fill the silence. "I think," he said finally, "people don't disappear. They just stop being seen." The words landed deeper than she expected. Lillian let out a quiet breath, something inside her loosening in a way that felt both comforting and dangerous. "Yeah," she whispered, "that's exactly it." Outside, the city moved as it always did, busy, indifferent, alive. Inside, something shifted. At home, Adrian sat alone at the dining table. 2 plates, one untouched. He checked the time, 9:12 p.m. No message, no explanation. He picked up his phone, staring at her contact name. For a moment, he considered calling, asking, demanding something, clarity, honesty, anything. But the thought passed as quickly as it came. Instead, he set the phone down. The silence didn't feel unfamiliar anymore, just expected. When Lillian finally came home, the apartment lights were dim. Adrian was in the living room, a file open on his lap, though he hadn't turned the page in nearly 20 minutes. "You didn't wait up," she said quietly. "I ate earlier." Another small lie. She nodded, setting her back down. "You could have texted," he added, not accusing, just stating. "I got busy." "With work?" A pause. "Yeah." Adrian closed the file, finally looking at her. There it was again, that almost imperceptible tension in her posture, the slight delay before answers, the way her eyes didn't quite hold his the way they used to. "Lillian," he said, his voice calm, measured. "Is everything okay?" For a moment, just a moment, it seemed like she might tell him the truth. Her lips parted, her eyes softened, and then, "Yes," she said, a single word. Clean, simple, untrue. Adrian held her gaze for a second longer than necessary, then nodded. Okay. He didn't push, he didn't argue, and somehow that made everything worse. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Lillian turned slightly away from him, her back curved inward as if protecting something fragile. Adrian watched the outline of her silhouette in the dark. He could feel the distance between them now, not just physical, but something deeper. Something that couldn't be measured in inches or explained in words. "Do you remember," Lillian said softly, "when we used to talk about everything?" Adrian blinked, caught off guard. "We still do," he replied. She didn't respond, because they both knew that wasn't true. In the quiet that followed, neither of them noticed the exact moment when their marriage shifted from something living to something merely existing. It happened on a night that felt no different from any other. That was what Adrian would remember later. Not the shock, not the betrayal, but the eerie normalcy of it all. The way the city hummed outside, indifferent. The way the apartment held its quiet, curated stillness. The way nothing warned him that something irreversible was about to unfold. Lillian was in the shower. The soft sound of running water echoed faintly down the hallway, blending into the low murmur of traffic beyond the windows. Adrian sat at the dining table, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him, his laptop open but forgotten. Her phone buzzed. Once. Then again, he didn't look at it immediately. He had trained himself not to. Respect, boundaries, trust. These were the silent agreements of their marriage, unspoken but understood. The phone buzzed the third time. Something about the persistence of it, sharp, insistent, cut through the stillness. Adrian exhaled slowly, then reached for it. The screen lit up instantly, and there it was. A name. Ethan. No last name, no context. Just a single word that shouldn't have meant anything, and yet, somehow, meant everything. Another message appeared before he could stop himself from reading. "Same place tomorrow? I can't keep pretending this isn't real." Adrian's thumb hovered over the screen. His expression didn't change, but something inside him did. Not breaking, not shattering, but shifting. Like a structure quietly collapsing inward without making a sound. He opened the message thread. It wasn't long. That was the second thing he noticed. This wasn't a long-term affair filled with months of history. It was recent, fresh, still unfolding. And yet, the tone, the familiarity, the emotional weight between the words suggested something deeper than time could measure. "You shouldn't text me like this. Then stop giving me reasons to." "I'm serious, Ethan." "So am I. This can't happen again." It already did. Adrian read each line carefully, not rushing, not reacting, just absorbing. The bathroom door clicked open. He locked the phone and placed it back exactly where it had been, the screen facing down, his hand steady. Lillian stepped out, wrapped in a robe, her hair damp, her skin still warm from the steam. She looked softer like this, unguarded, almost like the woman he used to know. "You're still up?" she asked. "Couldn't sleep." She nodded, walking past him toward the bedroom. "Me neither," she said quietly. Adrian watched her disappear down the hallway. For a moment he considered following her, asking, ending it right there, in the harsh clarity of confrontation. But something stopped him. Not fear, not denial. Something else, something colder. The next evening, Adrian left the office early. Not abruptly, not suspiciously. Just enough to create space for observation. He told no one, not even himself. At home, he moved through the apartment with quiet precision. Jacket off, watch placed on the table, phone set to silent. He waited. At 6:42 p.m., Lillian walked out of the bedroom, dressed in a way that felt intentional. Not overly formal, but not casual either. Effortless, deliberate. "I have a dinner thing tonight," she said, adjusting her earrings in the mirror. Adrian nodded. "Work?" "Yes." A lie. He could hear it now, not in the words, but in the space around them. "What time will you be back?" he asked. "Not too late." She hesitated briefly. "You don't have to wait up." Adrian held her gaze in the reflection of the mirror. "I won't." She offered a small smile, grateful, almost relieved. And that, more than anything, confirmed it. He gave her 10 minutes. Then he left. The city greeted him with its usual indifference. Horns, footsteps, fragments of conversations dissolving into the air. Adrian moved through it all with a strange sense of detachment, as if he were observing someone else's life from a distance. He spotted her 2 blocks away. She walked quickly, purposefully, her heels clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that felt almost rehearsed. She didn't look back. Adrian followed. Not too close, not too far, just enough to remain unseen. They turned onto a quieter street, lined with boutique shops and dimly lit cafes. The kind of place people chose for privacy, for discretion, for things that didn't belong in daylight. Lillian slowed her pace, then stopped. Outside a small hotel. Not luxurious, not cheap. Intentional. Adrian stood across the street, his hands in his coat pockets, his posture relaxed, almost casual, as if he weren't watching his marriage unravel in real time. The door opened. And then, Ethan. Adrian recognized him immediately, not from memory, but from instinct. The way Lillian's body shifted the moment she saw him, the subtle softening, the quiet exhale, the way her guarded composure dissolved into something real, something intimate. Ethan stepped closer. He said something. Adrian couldn't hear it, but it made her smile. That same smile Adrian had seen days ago, the one that didn't belong to him anymore. They didn't kiss immediately. That was the third thing Adrian noticed. They hesitated, as if acknowledging the line they were about to cross, as if part of them still understood the weight of it. And then they stepped inside together. The door closed, just like that. No dramatic reveal, no confrontation, just finality. Adrian stood there for a long moment. The city moved around him, unchanged. A taxi passed. Life continued, a siren changed, as if everything hadn't just one last time. Then turned, and the silence felt different. Back at the apartment, Coate, placing it neatly over the chair, poured himself another glass of whiskey, sat down. He didn't drink it. Instead, he stared at the glass, watching the liquid settle. There was no anger, no surge of emotion, no instinct to break something, to shout, to demand, just a quiet, hollow clarity, the kind that comes when something you suspected becomes undeniable. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "So, this is what it is," he murmured to no one. Not a question, not even disappointment, just recognition. Hours later, the door opened softly. Lillian stepped inside, careful, almost cautious. "Adrian?" she called. "I'm here." She found him in the living room, sitting exactly where she had left him. "You're still up?" she said, surprised. "I said I wouldn't wait." She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Guess you changed your mind." Adrian studied her for a moment, her hair slightly out of place, her lipstick faded. Something in her expression, subtle but undeniable. Proof. "I guess I did," he said quietly. She nodded, setting her back down. "Good night," she murmured, moving toward the bedroom. "Lillian." She stopped, turned. "Yes?" Adrian held her gaze. For a second, 2, 3, long enough for something unspoken to surface between them. Then, "Nothing," he said. Her shoulders relaxed, just slightly. "Okay." She disappeared into the bedroom. Adrian sat there long after the lights went out, long after the city softened into the early hours of morning. His mind replayed the scene, not obsessively, not emotionally, just methodically. Every detail, every movement, every truth he could no longer ignore. And still, he felt nothing. It didn't happen immediately. Adrian didn't confront her the next morning or the day after. He didn't raise his voice, didn't slam doors, didn't demand explanations. If anything, he became quieter, more precise in his movements, more deliberate in his words. Lillian noticed. Of course she did. But she mistook it for distance born from stress, from work, from the same quiet erosion they had both learned to ignore. She didn't know that something had already ended. 3 nights later, she said it again. I have another event tonight. Adrian looked up from his glass of water, his expression calm. Same place? The question was simple. Too simple. Lillian hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. What do you mean? She asked. Adrian held her gaze. The gallery, he said. Same one as before? A pause, then, yeah, another lie. But this time it didn't echo, it landed and settled. Adrian nodded once, as if confirming something only he understood. All right. She lingered for a moment, watching him. Do you want to come? She asked, almost cautiously. It was an unexpected offer. Not genuine, not entirely, but not meaningless either. A small, subconscious attempt to close a gap she could feel widening. Adrian considered her. For a moment she thought he might say yes, but then, no, he said quietly. I think I'll pass. Lillian nodded, masking something that flickered briefly in her eyes. Okay. She left 10 minutes later. This time Adrian didn't wait. He followed immediately. No hesitation, no internal debate, just movement. The city air was colder than before, sharper against his skin, or maybe it just felt that way. He kept his distance, his pace steady, his mind clear. There was no anticipation, only confirmation. The same street, the same hotel, the same quiet, deliberate steps as Lillian approached the entrance. But this time, Adrian didn't stop across the street. He crossed it. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, designed for discretion rather than grandeur. Soft jazz played somewhere in the background, blending into the low murmur of voices that didn't want to be heard too clearly. Adrian walked in as if he belonged there, because in that moment, he did. He saw them near the elevator. Lillian stood close to Ethan, her body angled toward him in a way that spoke of familiarity, of comfort, of something practiced, not accidental. Ethan said something that made her laugh, soft, unguarded, real. Adrian had forgotten what that sounded like. He approached slowly, each step measured, each second stretching just enough to make the moment feel suspended between what was and what was about to break. Lillian. Her name, spoken in his voice, cut through everything. She froze, not dramatically, not instantly, but in that subtle, unmistakable way the body reacts before the mind can catch up. Slowly she turned, and the words shifted. Her eyes met his. For a second she didn't understand what she was seeing. Adrian. Here, in this place that wasn't supposed to exist in his world. Then, recognition, followed by something else. Fear. Adrian, she breathed. Ethan stepped back slightly, confusion flickering across his face as he looked between them. Is everything okay? He asked. Adrian didn't look at him. Not yet. His gaze remained fixed on Lillian. Do you want to tell him? Adrian asked calmly. The question was quiet, controlled, but it carried a weight that pressed down on the space around them. Lillian's lips parted, but no words came out. Her composure, the one she had maintained so carefully, began to fracture. She started, but there was no sentence that would follow, no version of truth that could soften what stood in front of them. Ethan's expression shifted, realization dawning. You're married, he said, more statement than question. Silence answered him. Adrian finally turned his gaze toward him, measured, unemotional. Yes, Adrian said, she is. The air changed. What had been private, contained, suddenly felt exposed. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, stepping back again. I didn't know, he said quickly. She told me. Ethan, stop, Lillian whispered, her voice trembling. Too late. The name hung there. Confirmed. Real. Adrian nodded faintly, as if placing the final piece into position. Right, he said softly. Lillian took a step forward. Adrian, please, just let me explain. Explain. The word felt almost fragile in its inadequacy. He looked at her, really looked at her, at the woman he had built a life with, at the person who now stood in front of him like a stranger wearing a familiar face. I already understand, he said, and that was the truth. Something in his tone broke whatever restraint Lillian had left. Her breath caught. No, you don't, she said quickly, shaking her head. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. His voice didn't rise, didn't harden. If anything, it softened, and that made it worse. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her words unraveling. It just did. I was lonely, Adrian. You were never there, and I—" He didn't interrupt. He let her speak. Let her fill the space with reasons, with justifications, with fragments of truth wrapped in self-defense. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I did, but it doesn't mean I don't love you." That was the sentence she chose, out of everything. Adrian's gaze didn't waver. Behind her, Ethan stood frozen, caught in a moment he clearly hadn't prepared for. "I can fix this," Lillian continued, stepping closer. "We can fix this. Please, just don't walk away." Her hands trembled as she reached for him, but stopped just short of touching, as if she already knew, as if some part of her understood that contact would change nothing. "Adrian, please," she whispered, and then she broke. Not elegantly, not quietly. Her composure shattered completely as she dropped to her knees in front of him, the polished floor cold beneath her. Tears streamed down her face, uncontrolled, desperate. "I'm begging you," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of it. "I'll end it. I'll do anything, just don't give up on us." The lobby had gone silent, or maybe it only felt that way, because in that moment nothing else existed, just her, on her knees, and him, standing there, unmoved. Adrian looked down at her, at the woman who was once the center of his world, at the person who was now asking him to hold on to something that, somewhere along the way, had already slipped through his hands. He searched for something, anger, pain, anything, but all he found was emptiness. A quiet, undeniable absence, and in that absence, clarity. He exhaled slowly, then spoke, just one sentence. "I don't hate you," Adrian said. Lillian's breath hitched, hope flickering desperately in her eyes. For a second, she thought, "I just don't feel anything anymore." The words landed softly, no force, no cruelty, and yet they shattered everything. Lillian stared at him, her expression collapsing in real time. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not true. You don't mean that. You're just hurt. I'm not," he said. And that was the most devastating part. There was no anger to fight against, no emotion to work through, just absence. She reached for him then, rubbing onto his sleeve like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. "Please, Adrian, please, don't do this," she sobbed. "We can go to therapy, we can start over, I'll prove it to you." He gently removed her hand, not harshly, not coldly, just carefully, as if handling something fragile. "It's too late," he said quietly. He turned, no hesitation, no second glance, and walked away. Behind him, Lillian's sobs echoed through the space, raw and unfiltered. Ethan stood there, speechless, the weight of what he had become finally settling in. And Adrian? He stepped back into the night, the city unchanged, the world still moving, as if nothing had ended, as if everything hadn't. The apartment didn't change. That was the strangest part. The same view of the Hudson stretched beyond the glass, the same muted palette of furniture, the same carefully chosen artwork, the same quiet hum of a life that once felt intentional. But something essential had been removed. Not broken, not damaged, just gone. Lillian came home before Adrian that night. Or maybe she had never really left. Time blurred after the hotel, after the moment everything collapsed into a single sentence she couldn't escape. "I don't feel anything anymore." It replayed in her mind with cruel precision, stripping away every excuse she tried to build around it. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in the same clothes, her makeup long since smeared and forgotten. The room felt unfamiliar, as if it belonged to a version of herself she no longer recognized. When the front door finally opened, she flinched. Adrian stepped inside quietly, placing his keys on the table with the same measured movement he always used. Nothing in his posture suggested anything had changed, and somehow that made everything unbearable. "You're home," she said, her voice fragile. "Yes." He didn't look at her immediately. He removed his coat, hung it neatly, then walked past her toward the kitchen. Routine, still intact. "Adrian," she started, standing up quickly. "Can we talk?" He pulled himself a glass of water. "We are talking." The simplicity of it caught her off guard. "That's not what I mean," she said, her voice tightening. "About what happened." He took a sip of water, then set the glass down. "There's nothing to discuss," he replied. The words landed flat, final. Lillian stared at him, disbelief flickering through her exhaustion. "How can you say that?" she asked. "Our marriage, what we built, it doesn't just end like that." Adrian finally looked at her, not with anger, not with disappointment, just quiet recognition. "It didn't end that night," he said. "It just became visible." The truth in that statement cut deeper than accusation ever could. Lillian's breath hitched. "That's not fair," she whispered. "You're acting like this was inevitable." "I'm saying it didn't surprise me," he replied. Silence filled the space between them, because she understood what he meant, and worse, she knew he was right. The days that followed unfolded in a strange, suspended reality. They didn't separate, not immediately. There were practical reasons, leases, finances, appearances, the kind of things that tether people together even after something more important has already come undone. So they stayed, under the same roof, in the same spaces, but not together. Lillian tried. At first, it was subtle. She cooked again, meals she knew he liked, recipes she hadn't touched in years. She lingered in shared spaces longer than necessary, waiting for moments that might open into conversation. "Do you want dinner?" she asked one evening. "I already ate." A lie, she could tell now. But she didn't call it out. Instead, she nodded. "Okay." Another silence. She tried differently the next time. "You're working too much," she said, standing by his office door. "You don't have to stay late every night." Adrian didn't look up from his laptop. "I want to." That was the end of that. The absence of conflict became its own kind of violence. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no visible cracks, just a steady, suffocating quiet that left no room for repair. Lillian would have preferred anger. At least anger meant there was something left to fight against. But this was like trying to hold on to smoke. One night she found him sitting in the living room, staring out at the city. The lights reflected in the glass, distorting his reflection into something distant, almost unrecognizable. "Adrian," she said softly, stepping closer. He didn't turn. "Hmm?" She hesitated, gathering what little courage she had left. "I ended it," she said. That got his attention. Not dramatically, but enough. "With Ethan," she clarified. "It's over." Adrian nodded once. "Okay." That was it. No reaction, no questions, no relief. Lillian felt something inside her crack. "That's all you have to say?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm trying, Adrian. I'm actually trying to fix this." He turned then, meeting her gaze. "I know." The coldness in his voice made her chest tighten. "Then why does it feel like it doesn't matter?" she demanded. Adrian studied her for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because you're trying to fix something that isn't there anymore." Her breath caught. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "That's not true. You're still here. We're still here." "Physically," he corrected. The distinction was devastating. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time she didn't let them fall. "I'm not giving up," she said firmly, though her voice wavered. "I don't care how long it takes. I'll prove it to you." Adrian didn't respond immediately. He looked at her, not with hope, not with expectation, but with something quieter, something final. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. "Then what do I have to do?" she asked, desperation breaking through. "Tell me, Adrian. Just tell me what you want." The question hung there, heavy, fragile. He exhaled slowly. "I want you to stop trying to make me feel something I don't." That was the moment it truly settled. Not the night at the hotel, not the discovery, but this. The quiet realization that there was no path back. Because the person she was trying to reach was already gone. Later that night, they lay in the same bed again, but this time the distance felt infinite. Lillian stared at the ceiling, her mind racing, searching for something, anything, that could undo what had been done. Beside her, Adrian closed his eyes, not to sleep, just to escape. Days turned into weeks. The apartment remained unchanged, the routines continued. But the silence deepened. And in that silence something irreversible took root. Not hatred, not even resentment, just absence. And absence, Lillian realized, was far more terrifying than anything she had feared before. At first, Adrian told himself it was clarity, that what he felt, or rather what he didn't feel, was control, discipline, the ability to stand outside of emotion and see things for what they truly were. It was, in many ways, how he had built his entire life. Precision over impulse, logic over chaos. But clarity wasn't supposed to feel like this. It started with small moments, the kind that used to carry meaning, a colleague laughing too loudly at something insignificant, the soft hum of music in a passing cafe, a couple holding hands at a crosswalk, their fingers loosely intertwined in unconscious intimacy. Adrian noticed these things, but they didn't reach him. They existed, observed and catalogued, but never felt. Like watching a film with the sound turned off. You ever just stop caring? Marcus's voice cut through the quiet of the office late one evening. Adrian didn't look up from the document in front of him. About what? Anything, Marcus said, leaning against the desk. Work, people, life. Adrian finally glanced at him. Sounds like burnout. Marcus shrugged. Maybe, or maybe it's something else. A pause. You look like that lately, he added. Adrian frowned slightly. I'm fine. Marcus let out a soft chuckle. Yeah, he said. That's usually what people say right before they're not. Adrian didn't respond, because for the first time, he wasn't entirely sure. That night, he stayed at the office longer than necessary. Not because of work, but because going home felt redundant. When he finally returned, the apartment was quiet as always. Lillian sat on the couch, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in a long time. You're late, she said softly. I had things to finish. She nodded, closing the book. There was a time when she would have asked more, pushed, tried to fill the silence. Now she didn't. Did you eat? She asked. Yes. Another lie. She stood up anyway. I made something, she said. If you change your mind. I won't. The words came out more bluntly than he intended. Lillian flinched slightly, but recovered quickly. Okay. She turned toward the kitchen, her movement slower than before, as if weighed down by something invisible. Adrian watched her for a moment, then looked away. Later that night, he found himself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, studying his own reflection. There was nothing visibly different. Same composed expression, same controlled posture. But something behind his eyes felt distant, disconnected. He leaned closer, as if proximity might reveal something he couldn't otherwise see. Is this what it looks like? He murmured to himself. No answer came, only silence. Across the city, in a quiet apartment that suddenly felt too small, Lillian sat across from Ethan. This time, there was no soft lighting, no comforting hum of a cafe, no illusion of something new and undefined, just reality. And it didn't look the way she remembered. You've been distant, Ethan said, watching her carefully. Lillian let out a quiet breath. I ended things with him. Ethan's expression shifted, something between relief and expectation. And? He asked. She hesitated, because she didn't know how to explain something she barely understood herself. And nothing, she said finally. He frowned. What does that mean? It means you didn't change anything, she replied. The words felt hollow as they left her mouth. Ethan leaned forward slightly. I thought that's what you wanted, he said. To be free. Free. The word echoed in her mind. It had sounded so different before. I thought so too, she admitted. Silence settled between them. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that exposed everything left unsaid. Ethan studied her, his gaze sharper now. You regret it? He said. It wasn't a question. Lillian looked up at him, her eyes tired. I regret how it happened, she said carefully. That's not the same thing. No, it wasn't. He leaned back, running the hand through his hair. I'm not him, Lillian, he said. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm okay being second choice. You're not? Then what am I? He cut in. The question landed harder than she expected, because for the first time she didn't have an answer. What she had felt with Ethan had been real, or at least it had felt real in the absence of something else. He had listened, paid attention, seen her in a way she hadn't felt seen in years. But now that everything else had collapsed, that feeling didn't expand, it didn't deepen, it just stayed the same. And somehow that made it feel smaller. I thought it would be different, she said quietly. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. Different how? I don't know, she admitted. Lighter, easier. And it's not? Lillian shook her head. No. The honesty in that answer created a distance between them that hadn't existed before. Ethan stood up, pacing slightly. So what now? He asked. You go back to him? "No," she said quickly. "That's not. He doesn't want me back." The words tasted bitter. Final. Ethan stopped, looking at her. "Then what are you doing here?" he asked. Lillian opened her mouth, closed it again, because she didn't know. Not really. Back at the apartment, Adrian sat alone in the living room, the city lights flickering across the glass. For the first time, the silence felt heavy, not just empty, unsettling. He thought about the way Lillian had looked at him that night in the hotel. Desperate, broken, real. He tried to recall what that used to mean to him, what she used to mean. But the memory felt distant, muted, like something he had experienced in another life. Is this permanent? He asked himself quietly. The question lingered, unanswered, because beneath the calm, beneath the control, a small, unfamiliar crack had begun to form. Not emotion, not yet, but something close to it, something uncertain. And uncertainty was something Adrian had never known how to live with. Across the city, Lillian sat alone after Ethan left. The apartment felt colder now, quieter. She stared at her phone, scrolling through old messages between her and Adrian. Conversations filled with mundane details, reminders, shared routines, nothing dramatic, nothing intense. But now, she saw what had been there all along. Consistency, stability, a quiet kind of love she had mistaken for absence. Tears blurred her vision. "I didn't lose you that night," she whispered to herself. "I lost you long before that." And for the first time, she understood the weight of what she had done. Not just the betrayal, but the misunderstanding that led her there. Two people, in two different places, facing the same truth from opposite ends, that something essential had been broken, not in a single moment, but slowly, silently, until there was almost nothing left to hold on to. Almost. It was a Sunday morning when everything finally settled into place, not with chaos, not with raised voices or shattered glass, but with stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't ask questions anymore. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, soft and indifferent, casting long shadows across the apartment floor. The city moved below, as it always did. Cars, people, noise, all of it distant, almost irrelevant. Adrian stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee with steady hands. Across from him, Lillian sat at the dining table. She hadn't slept. It showed, not just in the faint shadows beneath her eyes, but in the way she held herself. Like someone who had finally stopped running, only to realize there was nowhere left to go. "Adrian," she said quietly. He didn't look up immediately. "Yeah?" Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. "I think we need to talk." He set the coffee cup down. This time, he didn't avoid it. "Okay." The word was simple, but it carried something different now. Finality. They sat across from each other, the distance between them no longer just physical. It was defined, acknowledged, undeniable. Lillian took a slow breath. "I've been thinking," she began, "about everything, about us." Adrian nodded faintly, waiting. "It didn't start with Ethan," she said. "No," Adrian replied. "It didn't." There was no accusation in his tone, just agreement. That alone made it harder. Lillian swallowed, her voice tightening. "I kept telling myself that I was lonely," she continued, "that you weren't there, that I needed something more." She let out a quiet, humorless breath, but that wasn't the whole truth. Adrian remained silent, listening, really listening, for the first time in a long time. "I stopped trying," she admitted. "I stopped asking for more because it felt easier to accept less. And then I looked for it somewhere else." Her eyes met his. No excuses, no deflection, just truth. "I betrayed you," she said, "but I also abandoned us long before that." The words hung in the air, heavy but clean. Adrian leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "That's accurate. No comfort, no cruelty, just recognition." Lillian nodded slowly, as if she expected nothing else. "Do you remember when we used to fight?" she asked suddenly. Adrian frowned slightly at the shift. "About what?" "Anything," she said. "Stupid things, important things. At least back then, it meant we cared enough to argue." A pause. "Now we don't even do that." Adrian considered her words. She wasn't wrong. "Fighting requires investment," he said. We stopped investing. The simplicity of it made her chest ache. "Yes," she whispered, "we did." Silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was honest. "So what happens now?" Lillian asked finally. There was no desperation in her voice this time, no pleading. just a quiet acceptance of whatever answer might come. Adrian exhaled slowly. "I've been asking myself the same question," he said.
And? He looked at her. Really looked at her. Not as the woman who betrayed him, not as the version of her he used to love, but as someone separate, someone he now had to see clearly. "We end it," he said. The words landed gently, but they didn't need force to be devastating. Lillian closed her eyes briefly, not in shock, not in denial, just in acknowledgement. "Okay," she said softly. That was it. No argument, no attempt to change his mind, because she knew this wasn't a decision made in anger. It was something quieter, something far more permanent. "I'm not angry with you," Adrian added after a moment. She opened her eyes again, searching his face. "I know," she said. And that, somehow, hurt more than anything else he could have said. "I wish you were," she admitted. "It would make this easier to understand." Adrian gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. "I know." He paused, then added more quietly, "I just can't stay in something I don't feel anymore." The honesty in that statement left no room for negotiation. Lillian looked down at her hands. For the first time, they weren't shaking. "I used to think love disappearing would feel dramatic," she said, "like something breaking." She let out a soft breath. "But it's not like that, is it?" Adrian shook his head slightly. "No," he said, "it's quieter." She nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "it is." They sat there for a while longer, not as husband and wife, but as two people witnessing the end of something they had both failed to protect. No blame, no defense, just understanding. "I start looking for a place," Lillian said eventually. Adrian nodded. "There's no rush," he replied. "We can figure out the logistics." Practical, measured, like everything else. But this time it didn't feel cold, just appropriate. Lillian stood up slowly, her movements calm. At the doorway, she paused. "Adrian?" He looked up. "Yes?" She hesitated, searching for words that felt sufficient. There weren't any, so she didn't try to find perfect ones. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not for the moment, not for the consequences, but for all of it." Adrian held her gaze for a second, then nodded. "I know." And that was enough. She walked away, not running, not breaking, just leaving. Adrian remained where he was, staring at the coffee that had long since gone cold. The apartment felt different now. Not empty, not yet, but transitioning, like something in the process of becoming something else. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. There was no relief, no satisfaction, just a quiet, steady sense of resolution. The kind that comes when a decision aligns with something deeper than emotion. For the first time in weeks, his mind was still. And somewhere within that stillness, something shifted. Not a return, not a feeling, but the faintest possibility of one. The apartment emptied slowly, not all at once, not dramatically, just piece by piece. Lillian started with the smaller things. Books she had once pretended to finish, shoes she rarely wore but couldn't bring herself to throw away, framed photographs, some she packed carefully, others she left behind without explanation. Adrian didn't ask. He didn't watch her pack, but he noticed. Of course he did. Each missing object left behind a subtle absence, like a sentence with words quietly removed. The space didn't feel larger, it felt altered, incomplete in a way that couldn't be rearranged. They moved around each other carefully during those days, not avoiding, not engaging, just existing within the same fading structure of a shared life. "Do you need help with anything?" Adrian asked once, standing by the doorway as Lillian folded clothes into a suitcase. She shook her head. "No, I've got it." A pause. "Thanks." He nodded and left. At night, they still slept in the same bed. Not out of longing, not out of confusion, but out of habit. A habit that neither of them felt the need to break prematurely. The distance between them remained untouched, two separate worlds divided by silence. One night, Lillian spoke into the dark. "Do you think we ever really understood each other?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. He stared at the ceiling, the faint reflection of city lights shifting across its surface.
I think we understood the version of each other we needed, he said finally. Lillian turned slightly toward him, though she couldn't see his face clearly. And the real versions? He exhaled softly. I think we missed those. The honesty settled between them. Not sharp, not painful, just true. The day Lillian left, it didn't rain. There was no symbolic storm, no dramatic farewell. Just a clear sky stretched over a city that didn't care. Her suitcase stood by the door. Not large, just enough for a beginning. Adrian stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. I'll come back for the rest later, she said. Take your time. A pause. Neither of them moved. Neither of them rushed the moment, because they both understood this was it. Lillian looked around the apartment one last time. The couch where they used to sit without speaking. The kitchen where conversations had slowly disappeared. The windows that had witnessed everything without ever holding on to it. This used to feel like home, she said quietly. Adrian followed her gaze. It was, he replied. Past tense. Clear. Final. She nodded, then looked at him. For a moment something flickered in her eyes. Not hope, not regret exactly, but something softer. Something that acknowledged everything they had been. Goodbye, Adrian, she said. He met her gaze. Goodbye, Lillian. No hesitation. No second chances hidden between the words. Just closure. She opened the door, stepped outside, and left. The sound of the door closing echoed longer than it should have. Or maybe it just felt that way. Adrian stood there for a while after she was gone. Not moving, not thinking, just standing. The apartment was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the same quiet. It wasn't filled with tension or unspoken words. It was empty. Truly empty. Days passed, then weeks. Adrian adjusted to the silence more easily than he expected. Or maybe he had already been living in it long before Lillian left. Work continued. Life moved forward. The city remained constant. One evening, he found himself walking without a destination. No office, no obligation, just movement. He passed by places that once held meaning, restaurants they had visited, streets they had walked together, moments that now felt distant, almost borrowed. Nothing stirred, no nostalgia, no pain, just recognition. He stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. Beside him, a couple stood close together, their shoulders touching lightly. They were laughing about something small, something insignificant, something real. Adrian watched them, not with longing, not with envy, just observation. The light turned green. They walked forward together. Adrian followed, but at a different pace. That night, back at the apartment, he stood by the window again. The same view, the same city, unchanged. He poured himself a glass of water, setting it down untouched, a habit he hadn't realized he still kept. Then he sat. The silence settled around him, familiar, steady. For a moment, just a brief, almost imperceptible moment, he tried. He tried to remember what it felt like to love her. Not the idea of it, not the memory, but the feeling itself. And for the first time, there was something. Not strong, not overwhelming, but present. A faint echo of warmth, buried beneath layers of distance and time. It flickered briefly, then faded. Adrian leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He didn't chase it, he didn't question it, he simply acknowledged it. Maybe it wasn't gone, not completely, just unreachable, for now. Across the city, in a smaller, unfamiliar apartment, Lillian sat alone. No carefully curated furniture, no shared history embedded in the walls, just space, and herself. She stared at her reflection in the darkened window. Not the version of herself she had presented to the world, but the one she could no longer avoid. I thought losing you would feel louder, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but it's just quiet. No answer came, because there was nothing left to say. Two lives, once intertwined, now moving separately through the same city. Not as enemies, not as strangers, but as people who had shared something real, and lost it long before they realized it was slipping away. What remained wasn't anger, or bitterness, or even regret in its sharpest form. What remained was understanding, and the quiet, haunting truth that sometimes the deepest wound isn't betrayal. It's the moment you realize you no longer feel anything at all.